students. Welcome to day 6 of AICTE sponsored STDP program, STDP on clinical mapping of epidemiology and biostatistics in biomedical and health research. So today our first session will be taken by Mr. G. Narayan sir. I would like to request Narayan sir to start the session.
I hope that all delegates are enjoying all the sessions from past 5 days. We are learning, even I am also learning so many things, new things, exclusively from the yesterday's session, like signal detection by using the FAER's database. Hopefully, in future, the delegates who are from different colleges, we are expecting to work collaboratively to bring new projects and to bring new evidence which is going to be helpful for the society. And coming to today's session, actually this is the session which need to come on second day or third day due to packed schedule of all other speakers. It has postponed finally. Anyway, it came on 6th day. I think now it will be very good understanding for you. Why? Because you may already cross so many things: outcome measures, will-to-do table, designs, evidence-based medicine, so that you are mostly familiar with more concepts behind epidemiological designs. Okay, coming to today's session, I am going to give a complete glimpse of all study designs which are available in epidemiology. Coming to learning objectives, the delegates can able to understand what is meant by epidemiology, and also what are the different effect measures we are going to use, what are the different outcome measures we are going to use in epidemiology, and as well as you are going to learn how to design observational studies and as well as how to design experimental studies. Okay, actually this session was planned in 2 sessions. One is for observational and another is to time constraints. I made completely, we are going to discuss both observational and experimental in one session, right? Right, coming to the epidemiology, we are having a good discussion with the Kannan sir. Sir had given various historical examples, what is meant by epidemiology and how it will be distributed in the population. Okay, right. Coming to the definition which was given by the World Health Organization, it is defined as study of distribution of diseases or its determinants in large number of population. Okay, here we are comes to a new term called determinants. Determinants means like in every situation it is very difficult to measure exactly what is the disease, how much disease has been distributed, how much population are affected with the disease. It is very difficult in such a case. Why? Because we are going to conduct a large number of population. If we are going to take large number of population for accurate measurement of the disease burden, it is very difficult. In such a case, we are going to use determinants. Okay, the determinants are going to directly they will reflect the what is the disease burden. A best example is usage of inhaler. Why? Because in every patient to go and measure the FEV1 and FVC ratio and to diagnose whether that patient is having asthma or not, it is very difficult. In such a case, we are going to use certain predictors like determinant. We are going to use if the person is going to use inhaler, we are going to consider that they are having asthma. It is not going to be accurate measure, but when we are going to use in large number of population, we need to make more and more simple to measure the burden. Okay, this is the definition. It is a wonderful definition, like distribution of diseases or its determinants in large number of the population. Okay. epidemiology is not only confined to the assessment of the burden, it is also responsible. Like if I am going to measure the burden of COVID-19 cases in Anantapur district, whether my job is going to be completed? No. I need to assess what are the causes, what are the risk factors for that burden, what are the risk factors for that economic crisis due to that disease. I need responsibility. As an epidemiologist, I am having a responsibility to know what are the possible risk factors. Epidemiology is also going to deal with what are all the risk factors, what are all the etiological agents are confined for that burden. Okay. After assessment of the risk factor, my job is going to be completed? No. Okay, it is not going to be fulfill my job. As an epidemiologist, I need to make the strategies, techniques, or treatments, or interventions which are going to work to reduce that burden. As an epidemiologist, I am not going to confine to only assessment of the burden. I am not going to confine to only assessment of the risk factors. The next job is I will plan the strategies depending upon the risk factor, depending upon the burden, depending upon the areas which are affected, whether it is rural or urban, male or female, old age or pediatric. Depending upon that, I am going to plan my strategy. That may be a drug therapy, or that may be distribution of the masks, or that may be distribution of the sanitizers. Depending upon the population level, I am going to plan everything. Okay. After making strategies, whether my job is going to be completed? No. Whether my intervention is going to fulfill the problem or not? Again, I need to check. That is going to call as a follow-up. All these things are going to come under the epidemiology. So that epidemiology is one of the very, very important branch to make public health policies. Okay, this is the complete definition of epidemiology. Well, now let us see what are the different effect measures we are going to measure in the epidemiological concepts. Later we will go through all the designs which are there from observational and as well as the experimental. Okay. I think these are the basic concepts. Most of you very well aware about all these concepts. I will give complete overview of all these effect measures which are available under epidemiological studies. The most common term in every pharmacotherapeutics textbook or in any like medicine textbook, we are going to find after disease they are going to give some epidemiology section will be there. In that this is the prevalence, this is the incidence, this is the incidence rate. Firstly, we need to know what is the prevalence and incidence rate. Coming to the prevalence, most of us we are going to confuse in this section. Prevalence, incidence density or incidence rate. Prevalence means it is defined as number of existing cases in total number of population at a particular point of time, at a single point of time. For example, today I want to know what is the burden of malaria in Anantapur by screening the medical records which are there in the health department. I am going to know. Okay, that what we are going to call as a prevalence, number of existing cases in total number of population at a particular point of time. And one more time we are going to cross across the literature that is going to call as a period prevalence. Period prevalence is nothing but, for example, if our sample size is 1000, okay, is it possible to get all the 1000 number of information within one day? No, it may take certain time, like 10 days or 15 days or 30 days. During this period, if any new cases are going to be happen, those cases are also we are going to include into our calculation. That we are going to call as a period prevalence. That's the only difference. Point prevalence, period prevalence. Okay, very simple. Number of existing cases in total number of population at a particular point of time. Okay, most commonly this prevalence measure will be used exclusively in two types of study designs. One is cross-sectional study and another one is case control study. Why? Because in these two studies there will be no any follow-up. Just we are going to look upon the background, look upon the what's the data is there already. Based upon that, we are going to make the interpretations. That's why in these two study designs, we are going to prefer most common outcome measure of epidemiology is called as prevalence. Coming to the next outcome measure, which we routinely use in the epidemiological studies, that is going to call as a incidence. The another name for incidence called as occurrence. Again, incidence will be two types. One is cumulative incidence and another one is incidence rate or incidence density. Both are same. Coming to cumulative incidence, it means the number of new cases. It means the number of new cases in a particular period of time, that may be a month or that may be a year or that may be 10 years. Number of new cases in certain period of time in population who are at risk. This is very important denominator. If we are going to see the denominator, it is very important. How the prevalence is going to differ with the incidence means in two terms. One is their existing cases. Here we are going to talk about new cases. In case of prevalence, we are going to talk about total number of population. Here we are talking about the population who are at risk. Who are at risk again to develop that case. Those population only we are going to take. That we are going to call as a incidence. Okay, this is the most common, especially in whatever the study designs which will conduct. If there will be any follow-up period will be there, at that in those study designs we are going to prefer usage of the cumulative incidence or incidence rate. Hope you understand. Most common study designs are cohort studies and randomized control trials or control trials. Okay, in this we are going to assign two groups and will make certain follow-up period of time depending upon our outcome of interest, whether it may be acute or subacute or chronic. We are going to make a time period of 6 months or 1 month, and finally we are going to estimate the incidence. Incidence in test, incidence in control, incidence in exposure, incidence in unexposure. Like that we are going to estimate. Okay, this is very good definition. Why again one more incidence measure is required? We are going to call that as the incidence rate. Okay, hopefully, if anybody had saw the medical literature, biomedical literature of any randomized control trial or epidemiological studies, most of the literature they are going to prefer to use incidence rate than the cumulative incidence. In literature, 90% of the studies will be on incidence rate, not cumulative incidence. Why we need to go for the incidence rate or incidence density? What's the advantage compared to the cumulative incidence? Are there any weighted advantages are there for incidence density? Means yes, there are so many advantages. Let us see what the definition is going to say. It is defined as number of new cases, number of new events in a person time observation. Here the denominator is not just a frequency, it is a person time observation. How much time observed in terms of days, in terms of months, in terms of years. How much time we observe during this observation, how many events we got. That what we are going to call as a incidence rate or incidence density. This is having its own advantages, like if, like for example, there is one trial is there, trial was started, few more participants are interested to enter into that study. Okay, in this case, if we are going to use cumulative incidence, we don't know the exact CI value. Why? Because they are coming in between the study. Okay, and also we are taking denominator completely as a number. Okay, so that there is some drawback is there. Similarly, once the study is going to be started, there will be so many withdrawals are also going to present. If there any patient or if any some patient due to his workload or due to some other constraints, he is unable to continue the study. He is interested to withdraw from the study. In such a case, we will not get exact denominator. Okay? To avoid, to overcome all these problems, we are going for the one of the new measure and interesting measure that is going to call as the incidence rate. In this incidence rate, we don't have any problem. The person may join at any time. The person may withdraw at any time. Why? Because we are concentrating on time observation. How many months, how many weeks, how many years we are observing the participants. That we are going to take. That's why we don't get any trouble in the calculation of the incidence rate. Hope you understand the concept behind prevalence, incidence and incidence rate. These are the formulas what we are going to use in estimation of the prevalence, incidence and incidence rate. Now, let us see how to calculate this prevalence and incidence. Okay, with examples, suitable examples. This is the small example which I had taken in Anantapur district. There will be so much of population will be there. The sample which is required to estimate prevalence of dengue is 10,000. After making some calculations, I got a sample size of 10,000. I had taken the 10,000 sample. In that 10,000, 500 persons are reported to be affected by a dengue. Okay, by observing their lab data or their records, I got a number of 500%. So, what is the prevalence of dengue in this population? Okay, what's the calculation? 500 yes.
10,000
divided by 10,000. Okay, 5% of dengue. Okay, if our prevalence is very less, means we can multiply with even thousands also. For representation, it will be very easy. If we are going to get very less amount of prevalence, in such a case, we can go for multiplication with the higher number. Okay, it can be represented very easily. Even every person can able to understand very easily. Okay. And the next one is incidence. The same example I had taken for a better understanding. In Anantapur district, in a sample of 10,000 people, 500 persons are reported to be affected by a dengue in 2017 December, and 100 new cases were reported from January 2018 to December 2018. Means 1 year observation is there to assess the incidence present in Anantapur district. What is the cumulative incidence and incidence rate of dengue fever for 1 year? Okay, this is the calculation what we are going to use. As per definition, we mentioned that new cases in the population who are at risk. If we are going to take this sample, already 500 persons are affected with dengue. Okay, so that we are not going to include them in our calculation. Okay, we are going to concentrate on only the population who are at risk for the development of the new case. Okay, that's why the calculation is very simple. The incidence, cumulative incidence is 0.0105. Okay. And coming to incidence rate, here we need to more concentrate. Like a total of 9,500 subjects are there who are free from the disease at starting point of our study. Okay, how many months we observed means 12 months observation is there. Depending upon our outcome, what we are going to estimate in the population, whether we need to use days or weeks or months or years, it is going to change. Okay, here I am going to use 12 months. The incidence rate is 0.007 case per month. Per month of observation, we are going to get a case incidence rate of 0.007. Okay. Again, like if there will be any withdrawals are there, we are going to exclude in our observation time. If any new cases are going to join, we are going to increase the number of months. Okay, that's possible in case of incidence rate, but it is not possible in case of cumulative incidence. That's the basic difference. You can observe very well from this graph. It is a prospective cohort study. Like we are going to measure the how many new cases are going to be happened in these patients A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. If you are going to see all these patients, the observation time, okay, in X axis they had given the number of years of observation, and on Y axis time at risk. Okay, like A subject was observed for 8.3 years. 8.3 years observation is there. After that, maybe he withdrawn from the study or whatever the cause, we don't know. And B subject, if you are going to observe, he had observed for 11.0 years. After 11.0 years, he got one case. Like that, you can observe for each subject how many number of years we are spending. The total number of years are 107.7 years. Okay, for 107.7 years, we got a total of 3 cases. Okay, the incidence rate is 3 divided by 107.7, and the incidence rate is 0.028 per person year. For a better understanding, we can multiply with 1000. It is the way how to calculate the incidence rate, and most of the literature we are going to get this measure only. They don't depend upon only cumulative incidence. Okay. Right. What's the relationship between prevalence and incidence? Okay, that can be expressed by a formula called prevalence is equal to incidence into disease duration. Means prevalence is directly proportional to the incidence. If the new cases are increasing, automatically the prevalence will also going to increase. And even if the duration of the disease, like if you are going to take diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, okay, they are going to be lifelong disorders. Okay, if the duration of disease is more, means automatically the prevalence is also going to increase. Even incidence is going to constant also. Means per every year we are going to get only 10 cases. But if the duration of disease is more, means automatically the prevalence is going to increase. Okay, this is the relationship between prevalence and incidence. Okay. Right. Now let us move to what are the most common effect measures or risk measures we are going to use in the epidemiological study designs. Okay. This measure, all these measures are if our outcome is dichotomous. If our outcome is dichotomous, in that situation only we can use all these effect measures. If our outcome is like continuous variable, or in such a case we can't apply all these things. I hope that you may know what is the dichotomous. Presence, absent, yes, no, death, life. Okay, like that. These we are going to consider as a dichotomous outcomes. Okay. If our outcome is dichotomous, we can use all these effect measures in the estimation of the risk in any type of study design. Okay, let us know what is mean by. Before that, I hope you may know the what's meant by 2 into 2 contingency table. We need to plot whatever the data we are going to get after conducting any study design. We need to plot 2 into 2 contingency table, and then we are going to estimate each and every effective measure. In case of 2 into 2 contingency table, on one plane we are going to take exposure status, and another plane we are going to take outcome status. Then we are going to observe that participants who are exposed, whether they are having outcome or not, and who are unexposed, whether they are having outcome or not. All these parameters we are going to incorporate into this table. Then finally we are going to calculate all the estimates. Right. Let us see each and every one. The first one is risk. What's meant by risk? Okay. It is defined as a probability that an event will occur. The event may be either it may be an adverse event, which is harmful event, or it may be healthy event. Okay. How much probability is there to occur of that event? That what we are going to call as a risk. I am going to use an example called risk of GI bleeding among NSAID and non-NSAID users. Okay, what is the risk of GI bleeding in NSAID and non-NSAID users? Okay, this is the data which is available. Like on one plane we are going to take who are taking the NSAID, and another plane we are going to take whether they are having a GI bleeding or not. Okay, if you will see, a total of 10 members are there who are using NSAID. In that we got 4 number of cases are there. Similarly, 10 persons who are not using NSAID, even they also got a total of 2 cases who are suffering with the GI bleeding. Okay, this is the data we are having. What is the risk in exposed group, in unexposed group? If we want to calculate this, the risk of getting GI bleed in exposed group is the number of events divided by total number of population. Number of events divided by total number of population. Or we can say it's simply like cumulative incidence in exposed group or cumulative incidence in unexposed group. That's also term which synonymously we can use. Either risk or it may be a cumulative incidence. Both are same. No need to confuse by the term. Okay? Like risk of in exposed group, what we got 0.4. We can convert it into percentage, or we can convert into 1000 times depending upon the value what we are going to get. To make interpretation we are going to multiply. Then it is very easy to understand. Right. And the next one is odds. Odds is one of the interesting term which we are not going to routinely use in our calculation. But the concept of odds came from gambling. Okay, odds of winning, odds of loss of that game. Okay, this concept came from the gambling. What's the actual definition for odds means? As we see, for risk, it is a probability of getting event. Here, it is a ratio of probability of having event to the probability of not having that event. Okay, that we are going to call as a odds. Okay. Hope you are getting my point. Odds means probability of having that event and probability of not having that event. It's a ratio between these two. That's what we are going to call as a odds. Okay. For example, if you are going to see the probability of color shade, ratio of probability of getting a color shade with the black. Okay, this is the way how we are going to calculate the odds. Okay, shall I move to the next slide? For the same example, now we are going to calculate the odds. Okay, for risk, for example, if we are going to take 2 into 2 table, A, B, C, D, like that we can make the specifications in the table. To calculate the risk, the formula is A by A plus B. A by A plus B in case of exposed group. Similarly, in case of unexposed group, the formula will be C by C plus D. Okay, to calculate the risk. Okay, now to calculate the odds, what is meant by odds? It is a ratio of probability of having the event and probability of not having the event. Okay, what's the formula for the probability of having event? A by A plus B. What's the odds? A by A plus B by C by C plus D. Okay, if we are going to make the calculation after striking all those things, finally we are going to get A by B by C by D. A by B. That's the formula for the calculation of odds. Odds in exposed group and odds in unexposed group. Okay, later I will tell the how we are going to interpret this value. Okay, generally odds is very difficult to interpret. It is not very easy. So that we will convert that odds into risk. The risk will be very easy to interpret. Already we had seen how we are going to interpret the risk value. Okay, we can make a conversion of odds into risk by using all these formulas. Risk is equal to odds divided by 1 plus odds. Then we are going to get a risk value. Like that we can convert odds to risk, risk to odds. Okay, with that finally we can estimate interpret all the values. Okay, let us see. In the later we will see all these things. Right. These are the most common risk measures which we are going to use in our epidemiological studies. Okay. Coming to the risk measures, ratio measures, there are three. All are synonymous only. Relative risk, risk ratio, or relative effect. All are same. Most of the time we are going to confuse in the literature. Some may represent as relative risk, some may represent as risk ratio, or some may represent as relative effect. But don't confuse. And odds ratio, and the last one is difference. Okay, that can be called as either risk difference, attributable risk, or absolute risk. All are same. No need to confuse. Okay. Coming to the designs, study designs. In case of cohort study and randomized control trial, we will be having a follow-up period. Certain time observation will be there. That's why it is possible to estimate a value of risk and difference values. In case of cross-sectional study and case control study, there will be no any observation period. We are unable to calculate the risk as well as difference. Ratios and differences are not possible in case of case control study and cross-section. Only we can able to estimate the odds ratio. Is it okay? Right. And the interpretation is very simple. If the value of ratio is 1 means both exposure and unexposure having no any association to develop the outcome. The exposure is not having any association to develop the outcome. If the value is more than 1 means it is going to cause the causal relationship. There is a positive association will be there. If the value is less than 1 means there is negative association. Similarly, even if we are going to take the difference, okay, if it is more than 0 means positive, less than 0 means negative. Okay, this is the way how we are going to interpret. And coming to odds ratio, it is also same, like 1 no association, more than 1 positive, less than 1 negative association. Okay, we will move to the how to interpret these values. I am going to take an example. This is a randomized control trial for treatment of esophageal varix. Esophageal varix is the most common complication in case of alcoholic liver cirrhosis. Okay, there will be portal hypertension will be there, the blood is going to back up and it will be bleeded into the esophagus. This is the most complication which we are going to see in the alcoholic liver cirrhosis patients. For this, we will be having some procedures, surgical procedures are there. What are those means? There are two are there. One is endoscopic band ligation. By using endoscopic band ligation, we are going to close that varix, close that hole, and further there will be no bleeding. And another option which is available is endoscopic sclerosing therapy. We are going to inject the sclerosing agent into the lumen so that the blood is not going to be bleeding. Okay. That ligation therapy is an innovative therapy, new technique which was available. We need to check whether this ligation therapy is going to be more effective than the sclerosing therapy or not. Okay, finally, after conducting study, we got a result called a total of 64 patients are there who undergone ligation therapy, and a total of 65 patients are there who undergone sclerosing therapy. Okay, and coming to in this 64, 18 persons are having the deaths. Okay, we are going to take death as an outcome. In case of sclerosing therapy, 29 patients having a death. Okay, based upon this result, which one is going to be better? Ligation therapy is giving a very good outcome. Why? Because the death rate is very less in case of ligation therapy. Okay. To make a meaningful interpretation, we are going to calculate the risk ratio. Okay. Right. These are the various values which are available. Relative risk is equal to A by A plus B by C plus D. The value is 0.62 and absolute risk is 0.17. You just left the odds ratio. Even odds ratio will be also calculated, that even converted into relative risk also. We will get the same value. No need to. Okay. Now we are going to know what is meant by relative risk and what is meant by attribution risk. How many we are going to interpret this value. As we are knowing that the value is less than 1, the intervention is protective. If the value is more than 1 means we can say that it is causing harm. The deaths are very high. Okay. How we make the interpretation means, again, whatever the available relative risk, we are going to convert into a measurable outcome called as relative risk reduction. Relatively to sclerosing therapy, how much reduction is there in case of ligation? Okay. Similarly, absolute risk reduction, how much difference is there between sclerosing therapy and ligation therapy? That what we are going to consider absolute risk reduction. Okay. These are the formulas what we are going to use. Relative risk reduction is equal to 1 minus RR, relative risk, into 100. Okay. How much difference is relative to sclerosing therapy? Ligation therapy is going to reduce 38%, and in case of absolute risk reduction, 17% is there. Most of the time we are going to confuse these two, absolute risk reduction and relative risk reduction. Hope you understand. Relative to the sclerosing therapy, what is the reduction is there in case of ligation therapy? Okay, that is 38%. Difference reduction is 17%. Did you got my point? I hope that you are able to catch the information. It will be well understood by seeing this graph. See that, for example, control, you can consider that it as a sclerosing therapy. Treatment, you can consider that as a ligation therapy. Okay. The relative risk reduction is common in all the cases. Okay. For example, if you take population 1, the control, if you are going to take it is 100%, how much reduction is there? Means 33% reduction is there. 33% reduction is there. That will be called as a relative risk reduction. If you are going to see the difference, 30 minus 20, how much absolute risk reduction is there means 10%. Okay, in all these three population, the relative risk reduction is common, but they are differ in the absolute risk reduction. Very important. Okay, right. This is the way how we need to interpret the value whenever you are going to get information or data. As a epidemiologist, we need to know. We need to interpret the value and we need to apply in the practice. Okay. Don't depend upon only relative risk reduction and see that what's the value of absolute risk reduction also. Okay. Relative to control, maybe the value will high number. 33% means it is a very good, it is giving more effectiveness like that, don't believe it like that. We see the difference. Okay, and again, the clinical significant value is also very important. So depending upon the outcome, what we are going to monitor. If it is death means, the interpretations are going to be different. And if it is a small fever or cough or headache, at that time, how we are, like, not only depending upon the numericals, we need to use our intelligence. Otherwise, you are going to misinterpret the value, and if you are going to apply that, it does not going to work out in the practice. Okay, right? And the last one of the outcome measure is number needed to treat and number needed to harm. This is self-explainable. No need to again clear about all these things. Number needed to treat means how many number of patients we need to treat to get one positive outcome. That we are going to call as a number needed to treat. Okay, for example, as we see that ligation therapy, how many number of people we need to treat to prevent one death? That we are going to call as a number needed to treat. Generally, these measures will be used exclusively whenever we are going to incorporate any patient in our discussion. Okay, we are going to explain the patient, you are going for surgery. This much chances are there. Like if you are going to explain in relative risk value, absolute risk value, they can't understand anything. Okay. If you will explain in these terms, the patient will comes to know what would be happening to him. If I am going to give for 10 members, one will be having a positive outcome. Like it is very local language. They can understand very easily, and they will make a decision whether to go for that surgical procedure or not. Similarly, a number needed to harm means how many number of people we need to treat to get one adverse outcome or one death. Okay, we are talking about harm. Okay, which one should be high? Which one should be less? Anyone?
It should be high.
Number needed to treat should be high. Number needed to harm should be less. Is it correct?
No, sir. Treat should be low, sir.
Treat should be low. Okay, even if I am going to treat 3 members, if I will get a positive outcome means
Good therapy.
it is a good interpretation. Good therapy. Number needed to harm should be more. Okay, like if I am going to give 1000 members, I will get only one adverse outcome. If I am going to give only 10 members means if I am getting one adverse outcome means it is not a good value. Okay, like that we need to make the interpretation. The formula for number needed to treat or number needed to harm is very simple. 1 by attributable risk or absolute risk. We are going to get a value 1 by 0.17 is equal to 10 members. Okay, these are the most common outcome measures or risk measures what we are going to routinely come in epidemiological statistics. Okay, right. These are the very basics. Now I will move what are the different types of observational, different types of experimental. I will give overview only. Okay, I will give design overview only. In detail, there are so many things are there once if we are going to conduct any type of project. Okay. Right. Coming to pharmacoepidemiological methods or epidemiological methods, this is the complete classification. Okay. As earlier we discussed, again we are discussing this classification. Firstly, we are going to divide designs into 2 types. Whether investigator is going to assign the treatments or assignments he is going to make. In such a case, we are going to call them as experimental designs. Okay, the completely it will be under the control of the investigator. he is going to give. You are going to take the test drug. You are going to take the control drug. Everything he is going to respond. In such a case, we are going to call them as a experimental designs. Okay, if the investigator does not going to make any changes, just he is going to observe what is happening in the patient, and he is going to note that whether it is adverse outcome or good outcome, he is going to note. Okay, in such a case, those designs we are going to call as a observational study designs. Okay, right. Coming to observational study designs, again we are going to divide it into two types, depending upon whether we are going to keep a comparator or not. Comparator or not. If there is no any comparator means, then we are going to call them as a descriptive study designs. If there is any comparator means, then we are going to call them as a analytical study designs. Comparing to that group, this group is having certain risk or certain good outcome. Like that, if we are going to say means, those designs we are going to call as a analytical study designs. Okay. Coming to descriptive, there are three are there. One is case report, case series, cross section. Like earlier we had seen about COVID-19. Okay. But similarly in analytical, again analytical will be divided into two types. Very, very important. On which basis we are going to divide analytical study designs into two types means, if we are going to make test and control based upon outcome status. Outcome status means disease present or disease absent. Adverse event present or adverse event absent. So whatever the outcome present and the outcome absent. Like that, if you are going to divide the groups, then it will be called as a case control study. If you are going to divide test and control based upon the exposure status or risk factor status or predictor status, if you are going to divide the groups, that design we are going to call as a cohort study. Okay. Coming to the other side, if the investigator is going to responsible to assign the treatment options, that what we are calling as a experimental designs. Again, the experimental designs are going to be two types. One is randomized control trials and another one is non-randomized control trials. The other names for these also there, like formal experimental designs, informal experimental designs. Informal means there will be no any principle of randomization, replication, local control. Okay, those designs we are going to call as a informal experimental designs or non-randomized control trials, like quasi-experimental designs with control, without control, after control. Let us see later. Okay. If we are going to apply a principle of randomization, randomly allocated, we are going to keep a control and replication, the experiment reproducibility we are going to increase, all these things, all these principles we are going to apply in case of randomized control. Like that we are going to divide that. Like we will go one by one and we will make it fast, and if you are having any doubt you can stop me and ask a question, no problem. Okay. Why? Because already these concepts you are very familiar. If we are very thorough about the basics, then it is very easy to understand all the things. Okay. This we have discussed already, evidence. Right. The first one is case report. Coming to observational studies, case report. It is very simple. Any event, any outcome or any disease which will be observed in a single person, then it will be called as a case report. Okay. As I said that in December 2019, China, Wuhan, one person came with a different symptoms which were never experienced early, different history examination, all these things. But if we are observed only in single person, then it will be called as a case report. What's the use of case report? It is responsible for the signal detection. It is responsible for the signal detection or signal generation. Okay, by this we are not going to confirm that the drug is going to cause the disease, that novel coronavirus is going to cause the COVID-19. With a single case we can't make any judgments. It is just a hint for you. There is some possibility is there. If you will take the example called aspirin induced race syndrome, okay, in one child you observe that aspirin is going to cause some permanent liver infection, whether we are going to ban that aspirin? No, we are not going to ban the drug. Okay, we will wait, but it will give a hint for all the cardiologists who are using aspirin, all the whoever the healthcare community who are using aspirin. It is going to give a hint called there is a chance of getting rest. But we are not going to confirm. To confirm that, we need higher levels of the study designs to confirm that association. But case report will give a signal. And very important point, what we need to remember is whenever you are going to suspect any case, any new case or any new event, try to communicate that event to the respective drug regulatory agency or health authorities. If it is a disease means we are going to communicate to the health authorities. If it is a drug induced event means we are going to communicate to the respective drug regulatory authority, CDSCO or whatever. Okay, that is very important. Reporting is very important in case report. Or writing a case report and publishing. Then only other healthcare community to know about whether the drug is going to cause that event or not. Yesterday we had seen all the communications finally where they will go. FAERS, Uppsala Monitoring Center, and then they will do the data mining and then they will identify the signal. Okay. After identification of the signal, some more procedures are there. We will go for the higher levels of the designs whether the signal is really it is associated or not. All these things yesterday there is a good discussion on it. Okay. And one more point what I want to mention here is in certain cases even case report may also considered as a good evidence for the practice in certain situations. In what situations means? One is if the event is very rare, like that event may not happen during this administration, but it was happened. Okay, in such a case, even it is a case report also, we need to gather all the information. And the second one is if you are having a clear information about de-challenging and re-challenging information. Like if you are going to re-challenge the drug, the event was disappeared. If you are going to de-challenge the drug, again the reaction was reappear. If that information, data is available, in such a case also, even because it is a case report also, we are going to consider that case report for the further investigation. We should not neglect it. That's the case report. I think there is no much information. Like this is a case report. A single, any event which will be observed, a single person that we are going to call the case report. It is responsible to detect the signal and which we are going to confirm by the higher study results. Okay. And the next one is case series. See, it is almost all case report only, but here we are going to get a series of reports in terms of either exposure or in terms of outcomes. Okay, most commonly 3 reports, more than 3 reports we are going to consider as a case series. If you are going to see the literature of COVID-19, startingly, okay, I am more habituated about the research studies. Like whenever I will see the COVID-19 research articles, startingly I got so many case reports, case series. Okay, about case series of perinatal outcomes in the pregnant women, case series of different COVID-19 cases, case series of severe COVID-19 cases. Like that, so many publications are there. Okay, I don't know how many members are really used that type of data and make you as a one of the publication. You as a co-author or author as a publication. Okay. But this case series is also going to be helpful for the signal generation. Okay. Further again we are going to confirm this signal by the higher levels of the results. Okay. Right. And the next one is cross-sectional study. As earlier I said that actually cross-sectional is both descriptive and as well as analytical. I will say how it is going to be descriptive and analytical. Descriptive means, like for example, if I want to know the prevalence of malaria cases in rural settings of the Andhra Pradesh state. Okay, that's what I am going to do. I will go to the health department. I will take the records and I will assess the how many number of population are there, how many already cases, existing cases are there. like year-wise prevalence or like only one prevalence. I am going to estimate. I am going to consider another what are the different how many number of cases are there who are suffering for that malaria, whether males or females, in which areas are more affected. All these things will come under the descriptive only. Okay. And again, even this design is also going to act as a analytical. How it means like this. This is a design of the cross-sectional study. Coming to the design of the cross-sectional study, 3 steps will be there for any design. The first step is selection of sample from the population. Selection of sample from the population. It should be a random. It should be a random. For example, here, if you are going to see that square, okay, that we can consider as a population. That box we are going to consider as a sample. Okay. The first step is the investigator is going to select the sample from the population by using a good randomization technique. Okay. Later, the investigator is going to assess the exposure status. Exposure status. For example, whether that smoking is going to cause lung cancer or not. Okay. What the investigator is going to need to measure in that sample, how many number of people are smoking, how many number of people are not smoking. Okay. Similarly, in the same sample, the next step is he is going to measure the outcome. What is our outcome?
Lung cancer.
Lung cancer. Okay. How many number are affected with lung cancer and how many are not. And again, he will make the relation like for example, if you are going to take exposure as a smokers and exposure as a non-smokers, A is going to be smoking with lung cancer, B is going to be smoking with no lung cancer, C is going to be no smoking but he is having cancer, D means no smoking, no cancer. Like that, finally we are going to make a 2 into table and we can calculate the odds ratio. This is going to happen at a single point of time. Here the problem is, one of the major drawback of cross-sectional study is, like whenever you are going to conduct a study, the person, for example, the person may have cancer, but unfortunately he started smoking after cancer. After cancer. At that time, we can't make that relationship between smoking is going to cause the cancer. Some other factors are there. But we can't judge here. Why? Because you are taking at one point of time. If pre-exposure may possible, post-exposure may possible. Okay? But we need pre-exposure. If the smoking is going to be pre-event, then only we comes to know the establish the relationship between the smoking is going to cause the lung cancer. Is it right? Okay. This is the major drawback of cross-sections. But we can identify what would be the likely risk factors are there. Whether it is age or gender, socio-economic background, smoking, alcohol status. What are the factors are there? What are the factors are associated with the development of the outcome? After assessing the factors, then we can make the strategies to overcome that burden. Cross-sectional is helpful to give the picture, snapshot about what is happening, but it is not going to be conclusive. Okay? This is the way how these observational study designs are going to be differ one by one. Cross-sectional study, we are going to conduct at a single point of time. We are going to measure both exposure and outcome. Coming to cohort study, exposure followed by outcome, and coming to case control study, outcome back to the exposure. This way, these three designs are going to differ with one and another. Coming to case control study, as I earlier said that we are going to take the cases and controls based upon the outcome status. I will give you one example here. Practical it is oculomucocutaneous syndrome. Oculomucocutaneous syndrome is very rare event. So that if I am going to conduct a cohort study, practical group 1, exposure group, non-practical group, another non-exposure group. If I want to follow them and getting that event will be very difficult. So that I am going to plan a case control study. Why? Because it is very rare. Okay, I am going to select the cases and then I will see the what is happening in the previous, whether they have taken pracular or any other conditions are there. I am going to assess like that. Okay. This type of design we are going to call as a case control study. Okay, hope you understand. Right. Coming to cohort, there are so many types of cohorts are there, which I will explain. The prospective cohort. Prospective cohort. Similar to case control study, here we are going to divide groups into two based upon their exposure and unexposure, like smoking and non-smokers. And then we are going to follow the subjects for a period of time to develop the outcome. And finally, we are going to see how much outcome is there. Like it is going to be a cancer. In the exposure group, how many members are affected with the cancer and not affected with the cancer. Similarly, in an exposure group, how many numbers are affected with the cancer and how many are not affected with the cancer. As we are making a follow-up, our outcome measures will be all those four. It's not a prevalence, it is incidence. Prevalence, relative risk, attributable risk, NNT or NNH we can estimate in case of prospective cohorts. Okay. Right. And one of the most important point here, what we need to remember is, as earlier even Kannan sir also stated that. Okay. At starting point, whoever the subject we are going to recruit, they should free from the disease of interest. Okay. Whenever you are going to start the study, you assign them into exposure and unexposure, but they should not have any disease. Like if you are going to examine the cancer, means the patients not suffer with the cancer. Okay, then only we can make a meaningful associations and interpretations. Only if they are having cancer, and it's smokers and non-smokers, and automatically our relative risk or attributable risk, we can get a wrong value. Okay, that's why we should take care of that. And one more important point in cohort study is, these studies are going to be very large studies, and so many years we are going to conduct. That's why we need to analyze the data at certain point. Preliminary analysis we need to conduct. That we are going to conduct midpoint analysis. By conducting midpoint analysis, shall we go further or not, or to stop that study, we are going to decide. Because it will take so much of time, cost, resources, etc. We need to take care of it. And remaining, I think we go to experimental study designs. As I said that experimental study designs are two types. We are going to classify these experimental study designs into two types based upon whether we are going to use these three principles or not. Depending upon that, we are going to calculate, divide. If we are not applying these principles, means those designs we are going to call as informal experimental designs. If we are going to apply these principles, those we are going to call as formal experimental designs. Let us see informal experimental designs. There are three types: quasi-experimental design without control, quasi-experimental design after control, quasi-experimental design before and after control. Okay, this is one of the schematic representation of without control. Like there will be no any control. Just we are going to take the sample and we are going to make an intervention. The intervention may be a treatment or vaccine or counseling or palliative care or surgery, whatever it may be. Okay, we will intervene that and then again we are going to measure the outcome. We are going to compare these two, before and after. Based upon that, whether our intervention is going to work out or not, we are going to decide. Okay, that design we are going to call as a quasi-experimental design without control. Okay, this is one of the studies which we conducted. by using quasi experimental design. Impact of pharmacist directed counseling on knowledge, attitude, and practices and medication adherence among hypothyroidism patients. A quasi experimental design. Here we didn't made any control. Like one group we are going to give counseling and another group we are not going to give counseling. Like the type of alignments are not there. Okay. We recruited the subjects and depending upon their requirement we made intervention. Initially we are going to get the complete scores about how much knowledge is there, how much they are aware about hypothyroidism, what are the risk factors, what are their food habits, what is their attitude. Okay. Whether they are having positive attitude or negative attitude about the hypothyroidism treatment, and whether they are following regularly levothyroxine therapy or not, what's the adherence level. All these things we measured at baseline, and then we made a face-to-face counseling interactive section with the patient. Later, again, we assess the how much improvement is there. Okay. This is going to be a quasi experimental design after control. Means initially there will be no any control. After completion of the study, we are going to take an historical control. We are going to compare with that control. Okay, then finally we are going to prove that whether our intervention is going to superior than the control or not. Okay, that's what we are going to call as a quasi experimental design after control. Here quasi experimental design before and after control. Before and after control. Like initially we will be having control, after also we will be having the control. What we are going to take here means, in intervention we will see the what's the difference between before and after. Similarly in control there will be certain follow-up period will be there. Here also we are going to observe what's the difference is there in control. Okay. The mean difference which we had seen in the intervention, the mean difference which we seen in the control group, these mean differences we are going to compare. Okay, but because these are independent, we can use a test called independent t-test or unpaired t-test. In case of first design, before and after, those are the results are for only one group only. Before and after, we can use paired t-test. Okay, to whether that our intervention is going to be having significant outcome or not. By using paired t-test, we can measure the difference. Okay, and I think right. And coming to the experimental study designs, if we are going to use these three principle of replication, randomization, local control, those designs we are going to call as a experimental study designs. It is very simple. Like principle of replication means if we are going to repeat the experiment more than once, the accuracy of the result is going to be improved. Okay, so that this principle, if we are going to apply in any design, that will be called as a formal experimental designs. In formal experimental designs, we are going to apply this. Either single or any combination, we are going to apply these principles. Okay. This is one of the example, like taking one mouse per group, we are going to see the impact of salt water in water on the BP level. If we are going to take only one mouse, so it does not going to give accurate value. If we are going to take number of mouses, okay, automatically the accuracy or the precision what we are going to get it is going to be improved. Okay, either we are going to increase the number or we can repeat the experiment to reduce the error. Both will come under the replication principle. Okay. And the next one is principle of randomization. Very important. Randomization means, for example, if I want to conduct any study, I want to recruit all these subjects into my trial. Each subject will be having equal probability to get into either treatment group or into control group. If I am going to apply a principle of randomization, every subject in this group will be having equal chances to get into test group or control group. That's what we are going to call as a randomization. If not, if I am going to selectively, like you are very healthy, you can go to test group, and you are unhealthy, you can go to control group. Like that, if I am going to assign, automatically it will bring biases into our result. So that randomization is going to responsible to reduce the bias or error, which is going to occur due to chance. Which is going to occur due to chance. Okay. And the last one is principle of local control. Control is different, local control is different. We need to remember this. Control is different, local control is different. For example, in randomized control trial, what we are going to keep, that is going to cause the control. We are going to match all the variables, demographic, clinical characteristics, all the variables. We are going to match and we are going to keep one control. That will be called as a control. Local control means, for example, I want to know impact of educational session on knowledge levels of the students. Okay, in students there will be having so many types of students will be there. Okay, for example, any one of the variable is going to influence your marks or scores. For example, you can take that intelligence, IQ level is going to influence your marks or scores. Okay. In such a case, I will take IQ level as one of the extraneous variable which is going to influence your outcome. I will make block by using that variable. I am going to make you as a blocks. Okay, that will be called as a local control. For example, high IQ, like moderate IQ, low IQ, very low IQ. Like that, I am going to make, by using that extraneous variable, I will make the blocks. Now I comes to know whether my education session or whatever the lecture I am going to take, how it is going to impact in high IQ, moderate IQ, low IQ. Okay, the variable is involving in the outcome. Now what we are doing is we are measuring that variable, how much will be there. Thereby we are removing the error. Okay, that type we are going to call as a local control. Local control. Coming to the designs, there are 4 designs are there: complete randomized design, random block design, Latin square design, and factorial design. Just I will give a glimpse of how these designs are going to be there. Within 10 minutes I will complete. If time is fastening, we are coming for a valedictory. Right. The first one is complete randomized design. In complete randomized design, again there are 2 designs are there. One is 2 group simple randomized design, and another one is random replication design. Okay. Right, coming to, this is the design which we mostly use in our clinical trials. Okay. Population, from that population whoever the sample we require, depending upon our study criteria, depending upon our sample size formula, randomly we are going to select the sample from the population. Later we are going to randomize that sample into to go to test group and control group. Okay, experimental group and control group. And for experimental group we are going to give drug therapy, and for control group we are going to give either placebo or standard or already existing drug. And then finally we are going to compare the outcome. This type of design we are going to call as a simple 2-group randomized design. Okay. We are applying randomization at selection. We are applying randomization at assignment, so that whatever the outcome we are going to expect from the drug therapy, that will be applied or generalized to the total population. Okay. Only if randomization is going to be done, then only we can say that that is going to be generalized. Okay. If we are not going to make any randomization, for our conveniently, if we are going to conduct study, even if you are going to get statistical significant results also, that may not apply to the general population. Okay. This is we already discussed. Right. This is the random replication design. Here in earlier design, we are applying randomization and as well as replication is there. Two principles are applied. In case of this design, both randomization is there and as well as replication is also there. To well understood about this example, I will this design, I will give one example. Like now, we will go for like we had a new novel techniques educational program and conventional educational program. Like that, we had made two courses to teach about research methodology or biostatistics class. One is novel and new techniques we are going to follow, where we are going to use so many softwares, we are going to take experts, etc., etc. And conventional way means like blackboard teaching like that. Now we want to test whether that new thing is going to give more outcome or not compared to the older thing. Okay. Here, like in earlier example, what we are going to see, we had assigned the treatment to randomly. We are going to assign to the test group and control group. Okay. For example, if you are going to take this type of study, here also what we are going to do, we are going to assign the participants to novel educational session group and conventional session group. Here the problem is we are making a randomization from the participant side. Okay. For example, like in novel or innovative educational model, the faculty who are going to be there, their background or their teaching mode, there will be certain differences will be there from one faculty to the other faculty. One faculty to the other faculty. Okay. In previous example, the randomization is possible from the participant side. By this example, if you are going to see, like if I am going to assign you to the innovative group and conventional group, okay, the innovation group you are going to get the results, from conventional group also you are going to get the result. But actually, there will be certain differences will be there between the faculty to faculty. Okay. Again, we need to go for the randomization from the treatment assignment side also. Okay. That type of design we are going to call as a random replication design. You understand? Right. You can observe that there are two populations are there. One is for the participants who are available for the study, and another is for treatments which are available to give. Okay. We are going to select the randomly, and again there will be random allocation will be there. Participants to the study group and the control group. Similarly, the treatments which are available, again we are going to randomize them to go for the experiment and control. Okay, this type of design we are going to call as a random replication design. And the next one is random block design. As I said that here there will be three principles will be there: randomization, replication, and local control. As we saw that if any extraneous variable is going to be affecting your dependent variable, means any one extraneous variable, like that may be IQ level, or that may be qualification, or that may be profession. If anyone is going to influencing your outcome, means then we need to go for the random block design. Okay, here we have taken an example called IQ is going to affect the outcome. We are having four educational strategies are there. We want to test how these educational strategies are going to impact your scores of your subject or whatever. Okay. What we are doing is we are blocking everything. Low IQ, very low IQ, average IQ, high IQ. Like that we are going to block. And one more important point what you need to know here is, whenever you will go for the block design or Lagrange square design, okay, I don't know, like anyone having a sample size calculation idea, we need to increase the design effect. Normally we are going to keep design effect as a 1. Okay, if you are going for block randomization or like that, 2 or 3 depending upon our complexity of our design, we need to increase our sample. Okay, right. like that. IQ we made as an extraneous variable and we had divided, and finally we are going to come to know the how much impact will be there of our educational module 1, 2 for each strategy, how many marks they are going to score. We will be having a clear picture. If I am going to comment everything, you will not know everything clearly. Okay. And the next one is Latin square design. This design will be preferable whenever any two variables are going to affect the outcome. Any two variables are going to affect the outcome. In such a case, we can use this design, Latin square design. Like for example, in agriculture field, if you want to test different types of fertilizers are available, you want to know what's the yield will be there by using each fertilizer. For example, consider that there are 5 fertilizers are there, A, B, C, D, E. Like that, there are 5 fertilizers are there. Now we want to know each fertilizer how much impact will be there on the yield of the crop. Okay, the yield of the crop is going to depend upon not only on the fertilizer quality or fertilizer type, even other factors may also affect the yield. For example, here seed quality, it may play a role, like one variable. Similarly, fertility level of the soil, it is also going to play a role in the yield. Okay, like that, if there will be two variables are going to involved in the affect our dependent variable, we can make a Latin square. Okay. You can here clearly you can observe seed quality. We are going to take x1, x2, x3, x4, x5. Similarly, fertility level on one plane. Okay, then we are going to assign our fertilizers, whatever we want to test, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, similarly, for next quality of seeds and next fertility level of the seeds. Like each fertilizer is going to cover all grades quality of seeds and all fertility level of the soil. If you are going to assign the Latin square design. Okay, this is also one of the good designs, especially it will be used in the agriculture fields. And the last one is factorial design. Now we have seen various types like control and block design, Latin square design. Here also it will be also same like that only, but here there is simple factorial design and complex factorial design. There will be two types will be there. Simple factorial means 2 into 2, like control variables, like what we said, that block like that. Here also level 1, level 2, like that different levels will be there. And if you are treatment assignments, treatment A, treatment B, at each level, what's the outcome you are going to get? Okay, that is going to be 2 into 2 table. Sometimes the treatment assignments will be more or levels will be high, like 2 into 3, 2 into 4, like that it will be happened. Okay, or it may be 4 into 2, 3 into 2, if levels are going to be very high, like that also it will be happening. Complex factorial design means again in each level there will be sub levels will be there. Hope you understand. Complex, like simple means 2 into 2, 2 into 3, 2 into 4, like that it will be possible. There will be increasing in the column levels or there will be increasing in the row levels. Any possibility will be there. That will be called a simple factorial design. Complex means in each level or in each treatment assignments. For example, if you take treatment assignments, there is treatment A1, A2. Treatment B means treatment B1, B2. Like that, if you are going to get, you need to write like 2 into 2 into again 2. And that is going to indicate the number of treatments. Like if again treatments are 3 are available, 2 into 2 into 3. That is going to be called complex factorial design. Depending upon number of variables which are interfering with your design, depending upon number of treatment assignments which you are having, again we need to make a design called factorial design. Okay. With this, I am going to end my session. Okay. Like actually, this is planned for 2 sessions. Okay, but time is going on. That's why I made as early as possible. Like if you are having any queries, you can ask me. And study design is very, very important. Appropriate epidemiological study design is very important to improve the quality of study and even to make meaningful interpretations from your study. Okay. Not only that, like all these areas, if your study design is fault, if any fault is there in your study design, they will reject. Okay. Like it may be academic errors or grant approval or thesis submission, study design play an important role. Even in sample size calculation. If you want to calculate your sample size, you need to know what's the study design exactly what you want to do. Okay. Right. With this session, I am going to end my session. If anybody having queries, you can ask. And I am expecting like this SCTP had improved a lot of knowledge from the point of research or statistics, and even we are ready to collaborate with you if you are having any plan to do either study on FAERS database or any systematic reviews or meta-analysis. We are eagerly we are ready to do. We are planning to do systematic review and meta-analysis also. Like if any faculty are interested, we can collaborate and we can give a new evidences for the community, scientific community. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all the participants. So now the delegates have been given a form for OSCE evaluation. So please fill the form and submit the form. After that, we'll have a tea break followed by valedictory.